As the sun sets on the 19th century, the people of the world look forth to a new era of magnificent progress and growth. But there's a problem. For the first time in human history, the population is growing exponentially, while agricultural production continues crawling along linearly. Projections show that the world will have 6 billion mouths to feed by the end of the 20th century, with most of the surge being concentrated in underdeveloped nations. As time wears on, a glorious future looks certain to be mired in cataclysmic famine. But there is still hope. Global agriculture is a frontier ripe for progress through scientific inquiry and innovation. But crossing this frontier would unleash a Pandora's box of unforeseen consequences, jeopardizing the environment, thrusting farmers under the corporate yoke, and exhausting global water supplies. While the battles of the 20th century raged on, the American agro-scientist Norman Borlaug was fighting a different kind of battle, the one against world hunger. His weapon of choice? Biotechnology. Conventional farming relied on ordinary seeds, often unproductive and vulnerable to disease, adverse weather, or pests. Borlaug, however, thought differently. He believed that by crossing varieties of wheat with favorable characteristics, he could artificially engineer a superior strain. Between the 1940s and early 1960s, Borlaug and a team of international agronomists headquartered in Mexico performed over 9,000 individual crossings of wheat, using groundbreaking genetic techniques like shuttle breeding and backcrossing to rapidly accelerate the pace of crop development. By 1963, Borlaug's vision was realized in the form of a revolutionary new strain of semi-dwarf, disease-resistant, and high-yield strain of wheat. Within the year, the new strain's adoption rate in Mexico shot to 95%, and, in a stunning testament to Borlaug's ideas, Mexican wheat production catapulted sixfold. Overnight, the nation went from importing more than 20% of its food to having enough to feed its growing population, and then some left over for export. As Borlaug's new seed traveled the globe, people everywhere hailed the dawn of a new revolution, not industrial or political, but agricultural, the Green Revolution. By 1964, new rice strains from the Philippines and Borlaug's wheat from Mexico traveled to India. Working with the Indian Minister of Agriculture, M.S. Swaminathan, Borlaug imported and began limited trials of the crops in the fertile Punjab region in the Indus Plains, selected for its reliable water supply. Following initial yields higher than any ever recorded in South Asia, India and soon Pakistan commenced mass imports of Borlaug's crops. By the late 1960s, in a sharp reversal of predictions made scarcely 2 decades prior, the Indian subcontinent achieved the remarkable feat of escaping critical famine risk, with India in particular becoming self-sufficient in the production of all cereals. By 1975, it had become one of the biggest world exporters of rice. As successes like these echoed throughout the world, agronomists and politicians alike hailed Borlaug and his Green Revolution as a unilateral miracle. In many ways, this was a reasonable characterization. Never before had science tangibly impacted humanity at such a scale. Harvests of staple crops more than doubled between 1961 and 1985, enabling the existence of some 2 billion people that would otherwise have fallen victim to famine or malnutrition. Meanwhile, many of the nations that implemented Borlaug's policies saw a new injection of funds into their agricultural-driven economies, enabled by exports of cereal crops. This in turn facilitated the economic growth that would see more than 1.2 billion people lifted from poverty in nations like China, India, and Vietnam. Even still, however, the Green Revolution brought with it a whole host of previously unforeseen problems. Because they were expected to produce a high yield, the new modified crops required far more fertilizer and pesticide than traditional varieties. After the introduction of these strains, the demand for such chemicals in the developing world skyrocketed to unsustainable and unaffordable levels. Over $300 million in US aid funding were distributed in 1969 for the express purpose of fertilizer purchase, a figure which would prove sorely inefficient at keeping up with demand in years to come. Such an overuse of fertilizers had severe environmental implications. Runoff from farms often contained high concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus, asphyxiating nearby water bodies and contributing to the collapse of marine ecosystems, particularly in highly farmed river bodies such as the Ganges in India and the Indus River in Pakistan. In addition, Chemicals such as arsenic from the runoff also infiltrated groundwater supplies, causing a sharp increase in their concentration in crops which accumulate water pollutants, such as rice. The large amounts of water used to form the new, thirsty strains also had the effect of exhausting the soil of much of its nutrients, causing it to become infertile. More crucially, however, this led to a critical overuse of groundwater supplies at a rate much faster than could be naturally replenished.
The Green Revolution, which is based on chemicals, is water intensive, not for the plants but for the chemicals. Uses 10 times more water. Globally, between 75% to 95% of the water in different countries is going into an intensive agriculture, which is not bringing us any gains in food security. In fact, it's undermining food security by destroying water availability, because the limiting factor for the production of food is not limits of land. We've got so much land, but the land is not always able to grow food because of limits on water.
The driving factor behind these issues was the mass commercialization of agriculture. Due to a combination of government subsidies and excess production, crop prices fell sharply. This caused a vicious cycle. To offset these drops in profit, farmers were pressured for their own sake and by the government to grow more food, which further exacerbated the issue. Drought-resistant crops, such as millets and lentils, were phased out in favor of monoculture crops of high-yield rice, wheat, soy, and corn. These crops slowly overwhelmed local ecosystems, exhausting the soil and leaving the food supply vulnerable to a single disease. Moreover, as a result of this cycle, farmers found themselves trapped. To stay afloat, they purchased ever-increasing quantities of modified seeds, agrochemicals, and machinery, the chief proprietors of which quickly consolidated into a handful of monopolistic corporations, Monsanto and John Deere, the most powerful among them. Monsanto in particular exploited patent law to prevent farmers from saving and reusing modified seeds, creating a cycle of dependence on their products. As soil degradation led to productivity stagnation, the price of farming the land skyrocketed. Small family farmers, the majority of the agricultural workforce, took also the brunt of the impact, many being forced to sell off their lands. Those who survived were forced to reinvest the vast majority of their profits towards upkeep.
The Green Revolution by the 80s was going into a negative economy. Farmers were getting into debt. There were more pests, there was more pesticide use. The nitrogen fertilizer was having to be used more and more. The soils were dying. The water was disappearing.
The first major effects of this would show in North Korea, where agricultural reforms modeled after the Green Revolution resulted in a heavy dependence on new fertilizers, pesticides, and electric irrigation systems. When the country faced economic sanctions and shortages of these inputs in the 1990s due to the collapse of the USSR, the agricultural system also collapsed. A shortage of electricity meant an inability to operate electric water pumps, while the cession of fertilizer and pesticide imports meant that large swaths of soil, exhausted by decades of intensive chemical agriculture, were unable to be productive. In tandem, these factors led to a famine that resulted in the deaths of more than 15% of the nation's entire population. This has led us to the present. Today, we stand at a watershed moment in our relationship with food. The Green Revolution was a remarkable marriage of science to global humanitarianism, bringing together collaborators and scientists across the world to explore a new frontier in global agriculture. Many billions in the world today have it to thank for their existence. However, the negative consequences of the Green Revolution are as significant, impactful, and prescient as its benefits. If we are to safeguard the stability of our agricultural system, we must ensure the careful use of water supplies. We must also reintroduce and re-incentivize crop diversity. We must regulate the use of fertilizers and pesticides to give the soil time to recover. Most importantly, we must transition the Green Revolution into a truly sustainable, long-term model of agricultural production. If we act now, and decisively, we can realize Norman Borlaug's vision of feeding every human being, while ensuring that the farmers responsible for this monumental task do not find themselves trapped in a cycle of debt and dissolution. If we neglect to act, future generations will reap what we have sown.